is Cheryl Erickson, and I am the Indigenous focused ECE instructor with Louis Riel Vocational College. Today's video will be on Chapter 4 of your text, Morrison, in the subject of Early Learning and Childcare Overview. This video is a brief summary of Chapter 4. Please ensure that you are reading your chapter, as this video is not a replacement for your chapter readings. So Chapter 4 is about the past and present. So what we know about children, about education, and it all stems from different theories on how children learn, grow, and development. Many of those ideas were built on the foundations of theories that came about in the past. We have 5 reasons to know about these ideas and theories from these great educators who have influenced the field of early childhood and education. So why is the past important? These 5 reasons are basically why the past is important in terms of the theorists and their ideas. So a lot of times it's the rebirth of old ideas. So things are often reborn, and a lot of the theories that we're going to learn about in the next few chapters are theories that were started and theories that were added on and theories that were changed over time. Good ideas and practices tend to persist over time. Theories were built on, were dreamed about again, and in many of our practices, the roots began long ago. And an example of that would be Montessori Programs, which stemmed from Maria Montessori's theory for many years ago. Theories and the past has been important in predicting and implementing today's current practices. Things like child-centered learning, kindergarten, were all developed, in the early 1900s. These theories empower us as professionals, and they also inspire us as professionals, especially when we see theory put into practice in our learning environments daily. So we're going to go through some of the theorists, and I'll briefly talk about this theorist and what their theory was. So in the 1400s, and this is how far back some of these theories were established. In 1483 to 1546, Martin Luther developed a theory of education, and Martin Luther felt that everybody should have the opportunity to learn to read. And at the time, in this era, really the only people that read were clergy, that were the people that were involved with churches and sermons on Sunday. So Martin Luther was the first person that actually put the Bible into written word for people to read. And so this was the beginning of teaching and learning in people's native language. And if you're wondering why the Bible or what language the Bible was originally transcribed in, that was in Latin, and then over time was made into different languages as well. And so the next theorist in the 1400s was John Amos, and he he believed that people were born in the image of God, and again it was important to educate them. And so John Amos was the theorist that put the first added pictures. So he made the first picture book, which is a really important foundation when young children start the process of learning to read and write. We often implement picture books as the first step in getting children to learn language and reading. John Lackey, from 1632 to 1704, he believed that children were a blank slate, or tabula rasa was the term used at that time. So he believed that it was the environment that influenced the development and the learning of the child. It had nothing to do with any innate or qualities that we were born with. And so he believed that any learning experiences and any ways that children learned, grew, and developed was through interactions they had within that environment. Jean Rousseau, he believed in nature and naturalism in terms of how children learn and grow and develop. And so he created this hypothetical child that he named Emile, and through that went through this unfolding process of how children naturally learn, grow, and develop through different stages throughout their lives. And so natural, nature, things that we are born with, things that we are innate within our bodies, preset maybe foundation of learning. So that was John Rousseau's theory of how development works. Yohann Petali, again, believed in a back to nature process for education again. So he actually purchased land, built a farm, and opened the first forest nature type of school. So educating children in a holistic natural environment, where they learn to read and write and manipulate the materials, the natural materials within their environment. So he believed that, again, development was a natural type of process. And it's interesting when we talk about these types of theories, because you almost go full circle. Where we are back to spending more time outside, and the importance of fresh air and nature and children learning within that outdoor environment, because we have moved to almost a technology and screen era with young children, and studies have now shown that too much screen time is not good for their development. So we've moved full circle, and many forest nature schools are opening up within the province of Manitoba. And that, stems back to 1746 when Yohann Petali opened his first forest nature school. So another part of Petali's theory was that children learn many concepts through hands-on manipulation. So counting, measuring, feeling, touching, different types of mediums and objects. And he also believed in multi-age grouping. And so again, what that means is that, his forest nature school on his farm of land would have had children from 4 till maybe 12 years of age. That multi-age groupings is beneficial in the sense that the younger kids learn from the older kids, and they're modeling, and the older kids can assist the younger children, and how that is all beneficial. Another historical figure was Frederick Frey, and he is actually one of the theorists that I find the most interesting and can relate to a lot. And he was actually the father of kindergarten. So Frederick Frey established the first kindergarten program. And he called it kindergarten because he looked at children as flowers and growing, kind of unfolding, right? And so that kind of coined that term garden. And we still today refer to the first step of the child's education process as kindergarten, so that term stayed. So he believed, that each child was unique and that they learned through play. He also it's very interesting as well as if you go and log on to the requirements listing for early learning programs, which is a list of material that each center has to have in order to be licensed. Froebel developed what he called gifts, and it was a variety of educational toys that fostered growth and development in certain areas. And even today, many of Froebel's gifts are still listed on that minimum requirements listing for licensed childcare programs in Manitoba. So John Dewey was a theorist from 1859 to 1952, and in the era where he lived, he developed his first he kind of developed the pedagogy of children and the pedagogical process of early learning. And he wrote a creed regarding that. So he believed in child-centered programs and child-centered schools. And what that means is that the program revolved around the interests of the child. And again, we've come full circle with that, because we have established today child-centered programs within each of our centers, because we have learned over time that children learn when they're interested in something. And he promoted the discovery of learning. So that is adding, giving them more materials regarding things that they're interested in to foster that learning and growing. Maria Montessori lived from 1870 to 1952, and she was actually a doctor by trade and worked in Italy in insane asylums. And so she believed that people, and this was back in the time where if you were mentally ill or mentally disabled, you were taken from your family and put in almost like a hospital with all other people that were mentally ill. And so she believed that the problem, within housing mentally ill people altogether was an education issue. It wasn't a medical issue. And so she opened up her Montessori programs to benefit children who were that had cognitive issues. And so in teaching these children and working with these children every day, providing them different tools and manipulatives, they were learning and growing and developing. And so that is really interesting that she did that in the 1800s, because I can tell you that here in Canada, we really didn't start incorporating children with disabilities into the school systems until the late 70s. In Canada and Manitoba in particular, we still kind of housed children with disabilities, didn't go to school, or sometimes there were institutions. And now, every day in a classroom, we have inclusive classrooms, and we have children with many different developmental delays and disabilities in our classrooms, and they're learning and growing and thriving. And that all stems from Maria Montessori's establishing her programs as well. So a lot of her programs are sensory-based, hands-on, manipulating different mediums. The environments are prepared so children know exactly what's on each shelf, and they can move to that shelf and take those materials and manipulate them and play with them. And our Montessori programs, there are many established programs here in the city of Winnipeg, and they all are structured around that pre-established type of program with many different materials, supplies for children to manipulate. And so throughout the course of the years, a lot has changed as far as the types of philosophies and the types of teaching approaches that have occurred with young children. This is just the theorists that I spoke about was really just the start of some of the theories, and we're going to get into more of them in Chapter 5. And a lot of the theories are more complex and have multi-stages of development. So it started with these theorists, and then as we move into the later chapter, you'll see how theorists like Piaget built on some of the other theories as well. And so moving forward, in 1962 to 2000, there were a few different changes as far as how we view children and how we view children in the education system. And so certain rights were established, the rights of children. When we look back in time, we look at children weren't viewed like they are now. Back in different, the earlier centuries. And so in the era of 1962 to 2000, different types of acts were started, like the Head Start Act was initiated, and that was to close the achievement gap. It was to ensure that all children were starting school on the same at the same level. And so it was really preparing children for success in school. And Head Start varies. So again, your textbook is very much Americanized, in which Head Start is different than it is in Canada. Head Start in Canada is associated more with the Aboriginal communities. So you'll see a lot in the different Aboriginal communities, and we do have about 4 or 5 Head Start programs here in Winnipeg. And so what it is doing is teaching, connecting children with their culture, because really culture is important to identifying, who we are. And in learning about ourselves, as well as kindergarten readiness skills. In the United States, head culture isn't associated with Aboriginal people, but maybe associated more with lower socioeconomic groups. And I know that they may say Spanish or in the lower socioeconomic end of some different cultures as well. So there's also an act that was established that was called No Child Was Left Behind. And so that ensured that schools took responsibility for educating the children, that they identified that children started to identify that children might have different needs for learning, and they weren't just going to pass them through. They were going to identify what those learning needs were. Was it dyslexia? What types of skills needed to be developed so that that child could be successful in their learning process. So 2001 to present, these are still the programs that are operational, and these programs, again, are more associated with the U.S. than they are of Canada. So we do see the No Child Left Behind is still ongoing. The American Recovery and Reinvestment, so, funding is going into the education system. Race for the Top, so different types of challenges that have some type of reward in the end, and so it's encouraging children to excel in education. There's an Every Student Succeeds Act as well in the United States. And again, you know, if children succeed in education, if they all start off at the same level, and they are confident learners, they feel good about themselves, they're encouraged, they're helped, they're going to go on to graduate from high school, they're going to go on to get a university education, they're going to go on to get a good job, they're going to earn money, they're going to contribute. They're going to be a successful member of society. So it's somebody that, you know, we want every child to be successful so that they can get good jobs and they are contributing to the system and not, you know, using the system as a means of living. And so these acts were created for that process. So I briefly spoke a few minutes ago about the views of children throughout the ages. And when we look at children now, we look at how amazing they are and that they have such great potential to succeed. And we, you know, we're positive. We encourage them. We're amazed at their capabilities and how knowledgeable and how successful they can be. That wasn't always the case in life. And so, you know, back in, you know, different times, medieval times, children were often viewed as sinful. And so, you know, that when I say children were viewed as sinful, it was because there was no knowledge or education of how children learn, grow, and develop. So if children did something that was wrong or inappropriate, they thought that they were disobedient. You know, there's been research and readings that I've done that, you know, even said that, you know, it was possessed by the devil because religion was a big issue back in that time as well. And so we don't look at children as sinful. We don't look at them as needing to be controlled or to be taught or to be obedient. We look at children as having a great wealth of potential, and we need to guide them and help them to grow and succeed. Another view is miniature adults, you know, and so when I say miniature adults is, you know, they're just little people that over time grow into be an adult, but they're not a miniature adult. They don't have the cognitive development that an adult would have. They can't make adult decisions. And this is kind of interesting too, because in some respects, in our society, we still kind of look at children as in miniature adults, and maybe not necessarily cognitively, but often children are dressed like mom or dad, and creating that image of, you know, being a miniature adult. That blank tablet or la tabla rosa was a view that children posed innate qualities that, you know, is why they grew and developed the way that they did. It was like our genetic code. It was our traits. And so, you know, I'm sure that there's merit to that, and we do have characteristics, and we do have some qualities and things like that of our parents, or, you know, somebody might say that, oh, your grandpa walked or talked like that, things like that. But nature is not the only experience for our learning as well. Growing plants was another view, and Frey, you know, that was part of his theory regarding children's development, and why he made his garden of children is, you know, it was an unfolding process, and He compared plants and gardens to how children learn and grow as well. Children were viewed as property of the parents, and so that, you know, as parents, we take responsibility for our children, and we want to teach our children, and we want our children to be independent. But I don't believe that at this time we think about our children as being property, but at one time they were. We view children as an investment for the future, and this is, you know, something that is to be very common almost in this era now, is that, you know, we invest in our children get a good education, our children go on to get a great job, and in the end maybe their children can help support the parents as they get old. You know, it isn't a societal view, and we look at different ways as parents that we can support ourselves in our own age, but in this time and in this era, this is a view held by many people still. And the return on investment, we do want children to become successful. We want them to be able to support themselves, to be self-sufficient, to have a good education, and have a good quality of life, I think is what all parents want for their child. And so I gave a few examples in this slide. It says, can you think of examples of where children are still thought of in these ways? So going back to the miniature adults and the sinful children, if you want to take a few minutes just to maybe think about that. If I didn't give an example, maybe come up with one of your own, and we can talk about that maybe at a later date in class as well. Child-centered programs. Again, I had mentioned that, you know, child-centered programs started probably in the 1800s, and again have come full circle. And so our education process has changed a lot over time. When I started school, education was, I went to school every day, and if I got into trouble or I didn't do my homework, the teacher phoned and told my mom, and then I got in trouble. Now education is so much more different. Education involves technology, and so there's daily communication. Parents can go up on the school's website and log on to the classroom and see photos or video of children interacting in a lesson and how they're learning and growing. Parents have the opportunity to log on and make comments. So it's so much different, and again, it's just evolving over time. And it includes, you know, family-centered, child-centered programs are what is happening in Winnipeg and in Manitoba in every child care center in the city. We know that children will learn best if they are interested in something. We take note of that. We're constantly observing our children, interacting with our children to find out what their interests are, and we're adding to our program. We're adding books, we're adding materials, different mediums. So if a child comes into the daycare and is talking about snakes, and they're really interested in snakes, and they're playing in the dramatic area with a container of snakes, we think, wow, there's a lot to be learned about snakes. So we're going to start adding to that. We're going to put out some books. We're going to ask the child questions. We're going to pose questions. You know, what do you know about the body of the snake? Do you know, is the snake a warm-blooded or cold-blooded? So we'll get into a lot of different topics, but asking the children a lot of questions about that is going to spark their thinking. Maybe they are going to ask you questions. Maybe you're going to want to research things. Maybe it'll move in a different direction, but if they're really interested in snakes, there's a abundance of information about snakes, to, they're shedding their skin, to the types of food they eat. And we're going to want to add all of that to our program because the children are going to learn, grow, and benefit from that. We want the child to reach their full potential. And by really building on their interests, we're doing that. We want them to grow to be that unique, special individual. And when I say one child might come into your program and be interested in snakes, we have many different hats, and we need to accommodate many different children in many different interests. And so where we're doing that for the child with the snakes, we may be providing child-centered curriculum for a child interested in construction, and so on and so on. So it's involves many different criterias within that environment. And maybe you can make some connections. Maybe the child that's interested in construction is going, hey, I saw you with those snakes, and that's really cool, and is going to get into that as well. And so we need to establish that in our particular program, and we also need to discover how a child learns. So not every child learns through seeing things. Some kids need hands-on. Some kids are better at listening. Sometimes white noise in the background affects the way we learn. So we need to figure out what each particular child's learning style is and meet that particular need, because that's how they're going to learn and grow and develop. So that concludes our lesson for today. Please ensure that you see your instructor in case or if you have any questions or need clarification on any of the topics we reviewed today. And also check in to ensure that you haven't missed any handouts or any assignments pertaining to this chapter.